The boy was playing the violin. But when a passerby spoke to him, the grand concert hall fell silent as 14-year-old Bobby stepped onto the stage, his violin held close like a shield. Through the glare of spotlights, he could barely make out Emily's small figure in the front row, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. This moment, his first solo performance at Carnegie Hall, should have been his triumph. Instead, his hands trembled with fear. Just hours earlier, he had found the threatening note in his violin case play a wrong note, and "You'll never see your sister again now." As he positioned his violin under his chin, he caught a glimpse of movement in the shadow stage, left a dark figure watching, waiting. Bobby began to play Sarah's melody, the haunting tune that had been with him since his earliest memories at the orphanage. Each note carried the weight of his fear for Emily, his only family for as long as he could remember. The melody swelled through the hall, reaching into every corner, telling a story of loss and longing that brought tears to the eyes of the audience. Halfway through the piece, a commotion erupted near the front row. Bobby's heart nearly stopped as he saw two men in dark suits grabbing Emily. Her stuffed rabbit fell to the floor as she struggled, her scream piercing through the music. Without thinking, Bobby changed the melody, his bow flying across the strings in a frenetic pace that matched his racing heart. The music took on a desperate edge, raw emotion pouring from his violin. Security guards rushed toward the scene, but Bobby kept playing, his eyes locked with Emily's terrified gaze. The melody transformed into something powerful, something that seemed to freeze everyone in their tracks. In that moment of chaos, Grace Harris, his recently discovered sister, who had been watching from the wings, burst into action. She sprinted down the aisle, her years of ballet training evident in her graceful movement, and reached Emily just as one of the men pulled out a gun. Bobby's bow trembled but didn't stop. The next few seconds seemed to unfold in slow motion, Grace throwing herself between Emily and the weapon, the security guards tackling the men, and Michael Harris, their father, rushing from his seat to shield both his daughters. Through it all, Bobby continued to play, the melody binding them together, protecting them. What he didn't know was that this night would set in motion a chain of events that would unravel everything he thought he knew about his past, his family, and the mysterious melody that had guided him home. The rusty gates of Sunny Meadows Orphanage creaked in the winter wind, a sound that Bobby had grown accustomed to over his 8 years there. The sprawling Victorian building with its peeling paint and worn wooden floors housed 30 children, but none quite like Bobby and Emily. They had arrived on a stormy night in October, Bobby clutching a violin case with white knuckles, and 4-year-old Emily holding onto his free hand, both covered in scratches and bruises that no one could explain. The circumstances of their arrival remained a mystery. Bobby, then 6, couldn't or wouldn't explain where they came from. The only thing he seemed certain about was the violin. When the staff tried to take it for safekeeping, he had screamed and fought with such desperation that they eventually relented. That violin became his only source of comfort in those early days when he would sit for hours by the window, playing the same haunting melody over and over. Emily was different. While Bobby retreated into his music, she slept almost constantly for the first few weeks. When awake, she would only accept food from Bobby's hands, turning away from even the kindest caregivers. The staff whispered among themselves about trauma and abuse, but Bobby's blank stares and Emily's silence offered no answers. The other children's reaction to the newcomers was immediate and harsh. Bobby's talent with the violin made him a target for ridicule and worse. The boys would mock him, calling him orchestra boy and fancy fingers. What began as verbal taunts soon escalated to physical confrontations. They would hide his violin, push him downstairs, and once even locked him in the basement for hours. Through it all, Bobby never fought back. He just played his violin with more intensity, as if the music could shield him from their cruelty. Miss Anderson, the head caregiver, tried her best to protect Bobby, but she couldn't be everywhere at once. Music like that doesn't come from nowhere, she would say, watching him practice. That boy has a story, even if he can't remember it. She noticed how he would sometimes pause in his playing, his young face scrunched in concentration, as if trying to grasp at memories just beyond his reach. Emily became Bobby's shadow, following him everywhere when she wasn't relegated to the girls' dormitory. The other girls teased her mercilessly about her dependence on her fake brother. They would steal her clothes, cut her hair while she slept, and spread rumors that she was cursed. But Emily found strength in Bobby's music, sitting quietly beside him during his practice sessions, her small face peaceful only when surrounded by his melodies. The nights were the worst. Bobby's screams would often pierce the darkness, his nightmares filling the dormitory with tales of fire and music. He would wake drenched in sweat, fragments of a melody playing in his head, always the same one, haunting and familiar. The other boys would throw pillows at him, angry at being awakened, but Bobby couldn't explain why the dreams terrified him so much. As years passed, the bullying intensified rather than diminished. Bobby's talent grew more apparent, making him an even bigger target. The other children couldn't understand why prospective parents would come to watch him play, only to leave without adopting either him or Emily. What they didn't see were Bobby's panic attacks before each meeting, or how he would deliberately play discordant notes when wealthy couples showed too much interest. He couldn't explain why, but something deep inside told him he had to keep Emily close, that they couldn't be separated. Despite everything, Bobby found moments of joy in teaching Emily simple tunes on his violin. Though she never showed the same natural talent, their musical connection seemed to transcend mere notes and melodies. In these quiet moments, away from the cruel taunts and physical abuse, they would create their own little world of harmony, where the pain of being unwanted couldn't reach them. The Harris family resided in an elegant Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Boston, where music seemed to seep from the very walls. Michael Harris, a world-renowned music teacher at the prestigious Boston Conservatory, had built his reputation on discovering and nurturing exceptional young talent. His stern face appeared in countless music magazines, his piercing blue eyes and silver-streaked hair giving him an air of distinguished authority. But those who knew him well could see the deep sadness he carried, carefully hidden behind his professional facade. Sarah Harris's absence haunted the mansion like an unfinished symphony. Her photos, showing a striking woman with flowing red hair and kind eyes, still adorned the walls, though they were starting to fade. The official story was that she had died in a house fire 8 years ago, but whispers in the music community suggested there was more to the tragedy. The grand piano in the living room remained untouched, covered in a thick layer of dust. Michael couldn't bear to hear it played since Sarah's death. Grace Harris, their 16-year-old daughter, carried the weight of her mother's legacy and her father's expectations. A gifted pianist herself, she practiced religiously, trying to fill the silence that had descended on their home since Sarah's death. Her relationship with Michael was complicated. He pushed her relentlessly toward perfection, while simultaneously seeming afraid of her talent. Some nights she would catch him watching her play, tears in his eyes before he quickly turned away. The Harris household operated with clockwork precision under the supervision of their housekeeper, Margaret Wilson. Every morning began with scales and arpeggios echoing through the halls. Every evening ended with Grace's mandatory practice sessions. Michael taught advanced students in the music room, his demanding standards making even accomplished musicians tremble. Yet he always seemed to be searching for something or someone in each new student who walked through his door. Grace struggled with her own demons. Being the daughter of Michael Harris meant living under constant scrutiny from the music community. Every performance was analyzed, every mistake magnified. She had grown defensive and cold, building walls around herself to protect against the inevitable comparisons to her mother. Her few friends knew better than to visit the mansion. The atmosphere of loss and unspoken pain was too overwhelming. The family's dynamics shifted dramatically the day Michael saw Bobby perform at the train station. Something in the boys playing a particular melody that seemed hauntingly familiar had caused Michael to go pale. Grace watched with growing resentment as her father became obsessed with bringing Bobby and Emily into their home. She couldn't understand why this orphan boy's music had such a powerful effect on her father, or why he seemed to look at Bobby with a mixture of hope and fear. The decision to adopt Bobby and Emily was met with resistance from Grace. "We're not a charity for street musicians," she had argued bitterly, but Michael was adamant, though he couldn't or wouldn't explain his reasons. Grace noticed how his hands shook when he signed the adoption papers, how he kept staring at Bobby's violin case with an intensity that bordered on desperation. The mansion's empty rooms, which had stood silent for years, were hastily prepared for the newcomers. Margaret worked tirelessly to make the spaces welcoming, though Grace made her disapproval known by refusing to help. The night before Bobby and Emily were due to arrive, Grace overheard her father in Sarah's old music room speaking to her mother's portrait. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Sarah. I hope you'd understand." When Bobby and Emily finally arrived, the tension in the house was palpable. Grace watched from the top of the grand staircase as they entered, noting how Bobby clutched his violin case like a lifeline and how Emily seemed to shrink behind him. But it was her father's reaction that truly unsettled her, the way his hands trembled as he welcomed them, the tears he tried to hide, and most disturbing of all, his sharp intake of breath when Bobby first played Sarah's favorite melody. The Boston Conservatory Preparatory School loomed before Bobby like a cathedral of music, its Gothic architecture and towering spires making his heart race with both excitement and fear. The prestigious institution accepted only 30 students per year in its junior program, and competition was fierce. The marble halls echoed with the sounds of practice rooms, piano scales, violin concertos, ballet suites blending into a chaotic symphony of ambition. Bobby's arrival caused immediate ripples through the school's carefully maintained social hierarchy. James Cooper, the previous star violin student, watched with barely concealed hostility as Bobby unpacked his worn violin case in the locker room. James came from old money, his Stradivarius violin worth more than most houses, and the sight of Bobby's battered instrument made him smirk with disdain. The practice rooms became battlegrounds of talent and ego. Students would deliberately book rooms next to Bobby, trying to intimidate him with their technical prowess. During his first week, Bobby found himself surrounded by the aggressive sounds of Paganini caprices and Tchaikovsky concertos played at full volume. Yet when he began to play his mysterious melody, the competing music would gradually fade as other students stopped to listen despite themselves. Catherine Stewart, the school's most respected violin teacher after Michael Harris, noticed something special in Bobby's playing. While other students performed with technical perfection, Bobby played with raw emotion that brought tears to listeners' eyes. During their private lessons, she would watch him with a puzzled expression, especially when he played pieces he claimed never to have learned but performed flawlessly. The competitive atmosphere intensified as the annual winter showcase approached. Practice rooms were booked around the clock, and dark circles appeared under students' eyes. James Cooper spread rumors that Bobby couldn't read music, that he was a fraud who played everything by ear. The whispers grew louder when Bobby struggled in music theory classes, unable to explain how he knew certain complex pieces. Emily, who had been enrolled in the school's beginner program at Michael's insistence, faced her own challenges. The other children, mostly from wealthy families, mocked her second-hand clothes and quiet demeanor. Yet something strange happened whenever she sat in on Bobby's practice sessions. Her presence seemed to make his music more powerful, more emotionally resonant, though neither of them understood why. The tension reached a breaking point during a master class with visiting virtuoso Alexander Pierce. When Pierce asked Bobby to demonstrate a particularly difficult passage from Sibelius's violin concerto, Bobby played it perfectly despite never having studied the piece. The room erupted in accusations of cheating, with James Cooper leading the charge. Bobby stood silent, unable to explain his mysterious ability to play music he'd never seen. Grace, who attended the advanced piano program, found herself torn between loyalty to her new family member and her position in the school's social hierarchy. She watched as Bobby faced increasing isolation, excluded from study groups and practice ensembles. During lunch periods, he would sit alone with Emily in the school's garden, playing quiet melodies that seemed to make the flowers bend toward him. The faculty was divided in their opinions of Bobby. Some, like Catherine Stewart, championed his raw talent and emotional depth. Others, concerned with the school's traditional technical standards, worried about the example he set. Michael Harris remained strangely silent on the matter, though his hands would shake visibly whenever he heard Bobby play certain melodies. As the semester progressed, Bobby's presence began to change the school in subtle ways. Students who had once played with mechanical precision started exploring emotional expression in their music. The practice room battles evolved into unexpected collaborations, as some students discovered that playing with Bobby elevated their own performances in mysterious ways. Yet beneath the surface of daily lessons and rehearsals, tensions continued to simmer. James Cooper and his allies watched for any opportunity to discredit Bobby. The pressure of being Michael Harris's adopted son, of proving himself worthy of his place in this elite institution, weighed heavily on Bobby's young shoulders. Only in those quiet moments with Emily, when he could play freely without judgment, did he find peace in his music. Catherine Stewart stood out among the conservatory's faculty, not just for her talent, but for her unconventional teaching methods. At 45, with silver streaks in her dark hair and kind brown eyes, she had turned down countless opportunities to perform worldwide, choosing instead to nurture young talents. Her office, filled with eclectic artwork and comfortable chairs rather than the usual formal furniture, became a sanctuary for struggling students. With Bobby, she showed extraordinary patience, spending extra hours helping him connect his natural abilities with formal music theory. James Cooper represented everything Bobby wasn't: privileged, technically perfect, and ruthlessly ambitious. The 17-year-old prodigy had been groomed for musical greatness since he could walk. His father, a prominent symphony conductor, had spared no expense in his son's education. Yet beneath James's polished exterior and designer clothes lurked deep insecurities. He practiced obsessively, sometimes until his fingers bled, driven by the fear of being second best. His hostility toward Bobby masked a growing fascination with the younger boy's emotional connection to music. Margaret Wilson, the Harris family's housekeeper of 20 years, carried more secrets than anyone suspected. Her seemingly simple role masked a deep connection to the family's past. At 60, with her grey hair always neatly pinned back and her apron spotlessly clean, she moved through the mansion like a guardian spirit. She had been there the night Sarah disappeared, though she never spoke of it. Margaret took special interest in Emily, sneaking the girl cookies and sharing quiet conversations in the kitchen when nightmares kept her awake. Thomas Reynolds, the school's janitor, became an unlikely ally to Bobby and Emily, a former concert pianist whose career ended after a car accident damaged his hands. Thomas now found purpose in maintaining the practice rooms and caring for the school's instruments. He would often let Bobby practice after hours, pretending not to notice when Emily fell asleep on the worn couch in his office. His weathered face and gentle demeanor masked a sharp musical mind that recognized something extraordinary in Bobby's playing. Elizabeth Chen, a quiet girl in Grace's piano class, slowly developed a friendship with the Harris siblings. Unlike her wealthy classmates, she attended the conservatory on scholarship, understanding the pressure of having to prove one's worth. Her calm presence and genuine appreciation for music rather than competition provided balance to the intense atmosphere. She became particularly protective of Emily, recognizing in the younger girl's eyes the same loneliness she had once known. The school's director, Dr. Richard Bennett, presented a complex figure in Bobby's life. Though outwardly supportive of Michael Harris's decision to adopt Bobby, his concerns about maintaining the school's prestigious reputation often clashed with Bobby's unorthodox talents. His wire-rimmed glasses and meticulously pressed suits reflected his preference for order and tradition, making him increasingly uncomfortable with the disruption Bobby's presence caused in his carefully structured institution. Sarah's former student, Amanda Parker, now a successful concert violinist, occasionally visited the school. Her appearances always caused Michael Harris visible distress and inspired intense curiosity in Grace. Amanda watched Bobby with an unnerving intensity, as if searching for something in his performances. Her cryptic comments about his playing style and her hushed conversations with Catherine Stewart suggested she knew more about Bobby's past than she revealed. Detective David Morrison, officially retired but still consulting with the police department, maintained a discreet interest in the Harris family. His investigation of Sarah's disappearance had never officially closed. He would sometimes attend school concerts, observing from the back row, his notebook always at hand. The detective's presence served as a reminder that beneath the music and competition lay deeper mysteries waiting to be uncovered. These individuals, each carrying their own secrets and motivations, formed a complex web around Bobby and Emily. Their interactions, whether supportive or antagonistic, would prove crucial in the events that followed. Each person held pieces of a puzzle that, when finally assembled, would reveal truths that would shake the foundations of the Harris family and the conservatory itself. The announcement of the National Young Musicians Competition came on a crisp autumn morning, sending ripples of excitement through the conservatory's halls. Posted on the main bulletin board, the elegant invitation promised not just a substantial cash prize, but also a chance to perform with the New York Philharmonic. The competition's theme, Healing Through Music, seemed almost specifically designed for Bobby's unique emotional style. James Cooper immediately declared his intention to enter, his confident smirk masking the way his hands trembled as he signed the registration sheet. The competition's age limit of 15 meant this would be his last chance to compete in the junior division. His father had already begun promoting his son's anticipated victory to his symphony connections, adding crushing pressure to James's preparation. Bobby discovered the announcement differently through hushed conversations he overheard between Catherine Stewart and Michael Harris. "He's not ready," Michael insisted, his voice strained. "The pressure, the publicity. It's too dangerous." Catherine's response was firm. "He needs this, Michael. You can't protect him forever." Bobby, hidden behind a practice room door, felt his heart race at the mention of danger, though he didn't understand why. Late at night, after the mansion fell silent, Bobby would sneak into the music room to practice. His secret sessions took on a new intensity as he prepared for the competition, despite not having officially entered. The mysterious melody that had always been with him began to evolve, incorporating elements of classical pieces required for the competition. During these solitary hours, strange memories would surface: fragments of a woman's voice, the smell of smoke, the sound of breaking glass. Emily, unable to sleep through Bobby's late-night practices, would often sit outside the music room, her back pressed against the wall. One night, as Bobby played a particularly emotional passage, Emily began to hum along. The harmony she created was hauntingly beautiful, displaying a natural musicality that shocked them both. Bobby opened the door to find her crying, overwhelmed by feelings she couldn't explain. The discovery of Emily's hidden talent coincided with Bobby finding an old competition program in the mansion's library. Dated 15 years ago, it featured Sarah Harris as the winner, performing the same melody that Bobby had always known. The program slipped from his trembling hands when he noticed the competition's theme that year: music's legacy. The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore. Catherine began giving Bobby unofficial lessons during lunch breaks, helping him prepare while respecting Michael's wishes to keep him out of the competition. She noticed how certain pieces seemed to trigger intense emotional responses in Bobby, as if the music was unlocking buried memories. During one session, Bobby played a passage from Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto that brought tears to Catherine's eyes. Only later did she realize it was exactly how Sarah had interpreted the same piece. Grace, initially resentful of Bobby's natural talent, found herself drawn to his late-night practice sessions. One evening she joined him at the piano, providing accompaniment to his violin. Their impromptu duet created something magical. The melody Bobby played seemed to weave perfectly with Grace's piano, creating harmonies that felt both new and strangely familiar. The experience left them both shaken, forming the first real connection between the siblings. As the competition deadline approached, tension in the Harris household mounted. Michael grew increasingly agitated, checking the locks multiple times each night and jumping at unexpected sounds. Margaret caught him burning old photographs in the fireplace, though she couldn't see what they depicted. Emily's newfound musical ability seemed to particularly disturb him, causing him to ban her from music lessons despite her obvious talent. The situation reached a breaking point when Bobby found his violin case open one morning, the strings of his instrument loosened, and a small note inside that read some melodies should stay forgotten. The handwriting looked eerily similar to the competition program's signature of Sarah Harris, but that was impossible. When Bobby showed the note to Grace, she recognized it too, though neither of them dared to voice their suspicions about their father's involvement. The atmosphere in the Harris mansion grew increasingly strained as winter approached. Grace's initial tolerance of her new siblings deteriorated into barely concealed hostility. During family dinners, she would flinch every time Bobby reached for his water glass, as if his mere presence contaminated the air. Her piano practice sessions became aggressive, thunderous Rachmaninoff preludes deliberately scheduled during Bobby's violin practice times. Michael Harris's behavior became more erratic with each passing day. He would spend hours locked in Sarah's old music room, and the sound of quiet sobbing often drifted through the thick oak door. During Bobby's lessons, his hands shook so badly he could barely hold his conductor's baton. He repeatedly changed Bobby's competition pieces, each time growing more agitated when Bobby played them perfectly on the first try. Emily's emerging musical talent created unexpected complications. One afternoon, Margaret discovered her perfectly reproducing a complex piano piece she had only heard Grace practice once. When Michael witnessed this, he turned deathly pale and ordered Emily to stay away from all musical instruments. The girl's tears and Bobby's protests fell on deaf ears, leading to the first major confrontation between Bobby and his adoptive father. "She has a gift," Bobby argued, standing protectively in front of Emily. "You can't just lock it away." Michael's response was chilling. "Some gifts are curses in disguise." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Grace's resentment reached new heights when she discovered her mother's old practice journals hidden in Michael's study. The margins were filled with notes about a special teaching method, one that seemed to match Bobby's inexplicable ability to play complex pieces without training. When she confronted her father, his reaction was explosive. "Leave the past buried," he shouted, the first time he had ever raised his voice to her. The household staff whispered about the strange occurrences. Sheet music would disappear from locked rooms, only to reappear in Emily's bed. The grand piano in the living room, untouched since Sarah's disappearance, would sometimes emit soft notes in the middle of the night, though no one was there. Margaret caught Michael several times standing in Bobby's doorway late at night, watching the boy sleep with an expression of both love and terror. Catherine Stewart's continued support of Bobby created professional tension with Michael. Their heated discussions in the conservatory's faculty room became legendary, with Catherine insisting that Bobby's gift needed nurturing, not suppressing. "You're making the same mistake twice," she accused Michael during one particularly fierce argument, though she refused to elaborate when Bobby questioned her about it later. Grace's private detective work revealed disturbing patterns. Every prodigy Michael had taught since Sarah's disappearance had eventually quit music altogether, as if their talent had been deliberately stifled. The discovery led Grace to question everything she knew about her father's teaching methods and her own musical upbringing. Emily began having nightmares that seemed to mirror Bobby's childhood terrors. She would wake up screaming about fire and music, though she had no memory of the dreams when awake. These episodes drove an even deeper wedge between Michael and Bobby, with the latter accusing his adoptive father of knowing more than he revealed about their past. The situation reached a crisis point when Grace found an old newspaper clipping about her mother's alleged death. The article mentioned a violin that was never recovered from the fire, a violin that bore striking resemblance to Bobby's. When she showed Bobby the article, his hands began to shake uncontrollably, and he played Sarah's melody with such raw emotion that Grace felt something inside her break and reform. As the competition drew closer, the tensions manifested in increasingly destructive ways. Grace's playing became technically flawless but emotionally void, while Bobby's grew more haunting and powerful. Emily retreated into herself, humming complex melodies under her breath that seemed to affect everyone who heard them. Michael spent more time at the conservatory, avoiding the house and the questions that lingered in every room. The preliminary rounds of the competition began on a bitter cold December morning. The conservatory's concert hall buzzed with nervous energy as young musicians warmed up, their parents hovering anxiously nearby. Bobby stood alone in the practice room, running through his pieces one last time, while Emily sat quietly in the corner, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit. James Cooper's sabotage began subtly. First, Bobby's violin strings were mysteriously loosened just before his performance time. Then his sheet music disappeared, though Bobby's ability to play from memory rendered this attack ineffective. Frustrated by Bobby's resilience, James escalated his tactics. He convinced several other competitors to spread rumors about Bobby's background, suggesting he was a fraud who had stolen his pieces from obscure composers. The situation deteriorated during Bobby's preliminary performance. As he began to play, a sharp screech from the sound system cut through his opening notes. Despite the technical disruption, Bobby continued playing, his music taking on an almost hypnotic quality. The judges leaned forward, captivated, while James watched from the wings, his face contorted with a mixture of jealousy and fear. Emily's breakdown occurred immediately after Bobby's performance. She collapsed backstage, sobbing uncontrollably and muttering about fire and music, the same themes from Bobby's childhood nightmares. When Michael arrived to help, Emily recoiled from his touch, screaming. "You let her burn!" The outburst caused a scandal among the gathered audience, and Michael hurriedly removed Emily from the building. Catherine Stewart found Bobby in the empty practice room hours later, his violin forgotten beside him. "I have to withdraw," he said quietly. "Emily needs me more than I need this competition." Catherine's response was unexpected. "Your music isn't just about winning, Bobby. It's about healing, healing, healing. You both need." Her words carried a weight Bobby couldn't fully understand. Grace, who had been practicing for her own performance, witnessed Emily's breakdown. Something in the girl's desperate cries struck a chord of recognition. She remembered similar episodes from her early childhood, just after Sarah's disappearance. For the first time, Grace began to question whether Emily's connection to their family went deeper than adoption. The competition committee convened an emergency meeting to discuss the disruption. James Cooper's father, using his influence as a prominent conductor, pushed for Bobby's disqualification. Catherine Stewart fought back, presenting evidence of the sabotage attempts. The debate grew heated, with Michael Harris notably absent from the proceedings. But Bobby faced an impossible choice: continue in the competition and risk further trauma to Emily, or withdraw and lose perhaps his only chance to uncover the truth about his past. The melody that had always guided him seemed to offer no clarity now, only a deep sense of loss and yearning. Margaret found Bobby late that night in Sarah's old music room, playing his violin softly. "Your mother used to play just like that," she said, then quickly corrected herself. Sarah used to play like that." The slip sent Bobby's mind reeling with possibilities he had never dared consider. James Cooper, racked with guilt over the consequences of his actions, approached Bobby the next day. "There's something you need to know," he began, but was interrupted by Michael Harris's sudden appearance. The tension between father and student suggested a history Bobby hadn't been aware of. The preliminary round ended with Bobby advancing to the next stage, despite the controversy. However, the cost of this success became immediately apparent. Emily refused to leave her room, Grace's playing grew increasingly erratic, and Michael began receiving mysterious phone calls that left him shaken and pale. Catherine Stewart's warning echoed in Bobby's mind. Music has power, Bobby. Power to heal, but also power to uncover what's been buried. Some people will do anything to keep those secrets hidden. As Bobby practiced for the next round, he couldn't shake the feeling that every note brought him closer to a truth that could either save or destroy his newfound family. Sarah's melody resurfaced in an unexpected way during a joint practice session between Bobby and Grace. As they worked through a challenging duet, their individual parts began to merge into that haunting tune Bobby had always known. Grace's fingers froze over the piano keys, her face draining of color. "Mom used to play this," she whispered, but only when she thought no one was listening. The discovery prompted Grace to dig deeper into her childhood memories. Late at night, she pulled out old home videos hidden in the attic. In one grainy recording, a young Grace sat at the piano while Sarah played violin, performing the same melody Bobby now played. Michael's reaction to finding Grace watching these videos was severe. He confiscated all the tapes, locking them away in his study. Catherine Stewart recognized the melody during one of Bobby's lessons. Her hands trembled as she made notes on his sheet music. Sarah composed this, she revealed hesitantly, for a special performance that never happened. When Bobby pressed for more information, Catherine grew evasive, but her eyes held a mixture of fear and sympathy that spoke volumes. Emily's connection to the melody manifested in disturbing ways. She would hum it in her sleep, adding harmonies that Sarah had written in her private journals that Michael had supposedly destroyed years ago. When confronted with this coincidence, Michael locked himself in his study for hours, emerging with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands. During a particularly intense practice session, Bobby's playing triggered a memory in Grace. She recalled hiding under her mother's piano as Sarah taught a special student, a young boy with remarkable talent. The memory was hazy, but the boy's playing style matched Bobby's exactly. When Grace shared this memory with Margaret, the housekeeper dropped a teacup, shattering it on the kitchen floor. James Cooper's father, watching Bobby perform at a school concert, made an offhand comment that sent shockwaves through the music faculty. "He plays just like Sarah Harris," he remarked to Catherine Stewart. "Same phrasing, same emotional depth. It's almost as if he stopped mid-sentence, noticing Michael Harris's stricken expression from across the room." The melody began appearing in unexpected places. Sheet music would materialize in Bobby's violin case, handwritten in what appeared to be Sarah's writing. Grace found her mother's old music diary, with passages that seemed to predict Bobby's arrival. "The music will find its way home." One entry read, dated just days before Sarah's disappearance. Detective Morrison, still investigating Sarah's case, noticed the connections. He observed Bobby's performances with increasing interest, taking detailed notes and comparing them to old videos of Sarah playing. His questions to Michael became more pointed, focusing on the timing of Bobby's adoption and his mysterious musical abilities. Emily's role in the mystery deepened when she perfectly reproduced one of Sarah's unpublished compositions during a casual piano session. The piece had never been performed publicly, existing only in Sarah's private notebooks. Michael's reaction was immediate and severe. He banned Emily from touching any instrument in the house, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic. The household staff began noticing other connections. Bobby would unconsciously use Sarah's unique fingering patterns, ones she had developed herself. He would make the same small gestures while playing, tilt his head the same way during difficult passages. Margaret caught Michael watching Bobby practice one evening, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "It's happening again." Grace's initial hostility toward Bobby transformed into a protective instinct as these connections multiplied. She recognized something of her mother in the way Bobby approached music, not just as an art form, but as a language of emotion and memory. This recognition brought both comfort and fear, as she began to understand the depth of her father's anxiety. The melody seemed to hold different meanings for each member of the household. For Bobby, it was a lifeline to his past. For Grace, it was a bridge to her mother's memory. For Emily, it was a key unlocking ability she didn't understand. And for Michael, it appeared to be a source of both desperate longing and terrible fear. The day of the competition's semi-finals dawned with an unsettling tension. Bobby arrived early at Carnegie Hall, his violin case clutched tightly against his chest. The historic venue's grandeur seemed to mock his growing anxiety. In the practice room, he could hear James Cooper playing through his pieces, each note technically perfect, but somehow lifeless. The first blow came just minutes before Bobby's performance time. James's father, conductor William Cooper, approached the judges' panel with a thick folder of evidence. "We have proof," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "that Bobby Harris has plagiarized his competition pieces." The accusation sent immediate ripples through the waiting area. Fellow competitors whispered and pointed, while parents exchanged knowing looks. The evidence seemed damning at first glance. William Cooper had uncovered recordings of an obscure violinist from 15 years ago performing pieces remarkably similar to Bobby's signature melody. The judges huddled together, their faces grave as they reviewed the materials. Catherine Stewart, sitting in the audience, recognized the recordings immediately. They were Sarah Harris's early compositions, never published but clearly the source of Bobby's music. Bobby stood frozen backstage, his violin hanging limply at his side. The weight of the accusations threatened to crush him. Grace, who had been practicing for her own performance, rushed to his defense. He couldn't have plagiarized these pieces, she argued fiercely. They're family compositions, they're part of our heritage. Her words caused Michael Harris, who had been unusually quiet, to flinch visibly. Emily, watching from the wings, suddenly stepped forward. Despite her usual shyness, she addressed the judges directly. "I can prove Bobby didn't steal anything without warning." She sat at the grand piano on stage and began to play. The melody that flowed from her fingers was a perfect counterpoint to Bobby's pieces, creating harmonies that could only come from an intimate understanding of the original composition. The audience fell silent, captivated by Emily's unexpected performance. Even William Cooper seemed taken aback, but it was Michael Harris's reaction that drew the most attention. He staggered forward, his face ashen, as if seeing a ghost. "That's Sarah's unfinished symphony," he whispered. "She never taught it to anyone." The judges found themselves in an unprecedented situation. The plagiarism accusation had transformed into something more complex, a question of musical heritage and family legacy. Catherine Stewart seized the moment to address the panel. "What you're hearing isn't plagiarism, it's inheritance. Music passes through families in ways we don't fully understand." James Cooper, watching from the sidelines, felt his carefully constructed world crumbling. His father's scheme to discredit Bobby had backfired spectacularly. In a moment of conscience, he stepped forward. "I knew about the recordings," he admitted. "Dad found them in the conservatory archives and planned this whole thing. But there's something else in those archives you should see." The competition ground to a halt as James revealed a collection of letters between Sarah Harris and the conservatory. The letters spoke of a special teaching method, one that allowed musical knowledge to pass from teacher to student in unusual ways. Sarah's last letter, dated just before her disappearance, mentioned a breakthrough with a young student, though the student's name had been carefully redacted. As the controversy swirled, Bobby remained oddly calm. He lifted his violin and began to play not his competition piece, but Sarah's melody in its purest form. The music filled Carnegie Hall with a power that silenced all debate. Those present would later struggle to describe what they heard. It was as if generations of musicians were playing through a single instrument. Grace watched her brother perform with tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she truly heard her mother's voice in his music. The realization hit her with devastating force. Bobby wasn't just playing Sarah's melody, he was completing it, adding phrases and harmonies that her mother had never written down but somehow existed in the music itself. The judges ultimately allowed Bobby to continue in the competition, but the damage to the Cooper family's reputation was severe. William Cooper resigned from his position at the symphony, and James withdrew from the competition, unable to face the consequences of his father's actions and his own complicity. The events at Carnegie Hall changed the dynamics within the Harris family forever. Michael could no longer hide from the questions that Bobby's music raised. Grace's hostility transformed into fierce protectiveness. And Emily's unexpected performance opened doors that could never be closed again. As Bobby left the stage that day, exhausted but vindicated, he found Catherine Stewart waiting in the wings. "Your mother would be proud," she said softly, then caught herself. Sarah would be proud." But Bobby had caught the slip, and the questions it raised would lead him down a path that would uncover even deeper mysteries within the Harris family. The aftermath of the Carnegie Hall incident shattered the Harris family's fragile peace. Michael Harris retreated to his study, emerging only for meals, his face haggard and eyes haunted. One evening, after a particularly intense practice session where Bobby and Emily had performed Sarah's melody together, Michael finally broke his silence. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice trembling. "About Sarah. About your mother," but before he could continue, Grace burst into the room, clutching a stack of yellowed letters she discovered hidden behind the piano's false back panel. "Tell them the truth, Dad," she demanded, her voice cracking. "Tell them why you really adopted Bobby." The letters revealed a devastating history. Years before her disappearance, Sarah had written to Michael about a special student, a young boy with extraordinary talent. Her descriptions of the child's playing matched Bobby's style perfectly. The final letter, dated just days before the fire, contained a desperate plea: "Protect him, Michael. They'll try to use his gift. Promise me you'll keep him safe." Grace's discovery sparked a violent argument. "You knew," she screamed at her father. "You knew who Bobby was all along." Michael collapsed into his chair, looking suddenly old and defeated. "I couldn't be sure," he whispered. "I couldn't risk being wrong or right." His cryptic response only fueled Grace's anger and Bobby's confusion. Emily, witnessing the confrontation, began humming Sarah's melody. The sound seemed to physically affect Michael, causing him to clutch his chest as if in pain. "Stop," he begged. "Please just stop." But Emily continued, her voice growing stronger, adding variations that even Bobby had never heard before. Margaret found them like this: Grace confronting her father, Bobby frozen in shock, and Emily singing that haunting melody. The housekeeper took one look at the scattered letters and turned pale. "It's time," she said firmly to Michael. They deserved to know everything. Her words carried the weight of 2 decades of kept secrets. The truth began to spill out in fragments. Michael revealed how Sarah had developed a unique teaching method, one that allowed her to transfer musical knowledge directly through emotional connection. She had used this method with a promising young student, a boy whose talent mirrored her own. But others had learned of her technique, wanting to exploit it for their own purposes. The fire wasn't an accident, Michael admitted, his voice barely audible. They came for her research for her student. Sarah, his voice broke. Sarah made sure they found nothing, but the cost. He couldn't continue, overcome by memories he'd suppressed for years. Grace discovered more evidence in Sarah's old music room photographs of a young boy playing violin, his face blurred but his posture unmistakably like Bobby's. Sheet music covered with Sarah's handwriting contained marginal notes about the boy's progress, his extraordinary ability to absorb music emotionally rather than technically. Bobby struggled to process these revelations. Fragments of memories began surfacing: a woman with red hair smiling as he played, the smell of smoke, a desperate voice telling him to run. But the memories remained frustratingly incomplete, like a piece of music with missing measures. Emily's role in the family drama deepened when Margaret revealed that she had been present the night of the fire. Emily wasn't just randomly placed at the orphanage, she explained. Sarah arranged it. She knew Bobby would need an anchor, someone to keep his gift grounded. The revelation explained the deep connection between the siblings that had existed from their first meeting. The crisis reached its peak when Catherine Stewart arrived at the mansion late one night, carrying a worn leather journal. "Sarah gave me this for safekeeping," she told Michael. "She said I'd know when it was time." The journal contained detailed accounts of Sarah's work, including her hopes and fears for her gifted student's future. Michael's attempt to grab the journal from Catherine resulted in a physical struggle that shocked everyone present. "They can't know," he shouted. "It's the only way to keep them safe," but Grace intervened, standing between her father and her teacher. "Safe from what, Dad? From the truth? From who they really are." As the family's foundations crumbled, Bobby retreated to the music room, playing Sarah's melody with an intensity that drew everyone to him. The music seemed to carry all their pain, their secrets, their unspoken truths. Grace joined him at the piano, then Emily with her voice. The harmony they created spoke of loss and hope, of broken bonds and new connections. The truth about Emily emerged during a stormy night when the power went out at the Harris mansion. By candlelight, Margaret began sharing stories of the past, perhaps loosened by the intimate atmosphere and the weight of too many secrets. She spoke of another family, the Winters, who had been close friends with the Harrises before Sarah's disappearance. Claire Winters was Sarah's closest friend and confidante, Margaret revealed, her voice soft with remembrance. She was there every step of the way as Sarah developed her teaching methods. The mention of Claire's name caused Michael to sink deeper into his armchair, his face a mask of old grief. As Margaret continued her story, the connections began to crystallize. Claire Winters had been a gifted pianist herself, though she never performed publicly. She had a daughter, born just months before the fire that claimed Sarah. That daughter was Emily. The revelation stunned the room into silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Claire entrusted Emily to Sarah's care the night everything changed, Margaret explained. She knew they were coming for Sarah's research for Bobby. She helped create the diversion that allowed Sarah to hide. She stopped abruptly, glancing at Michael's warning look. But Grace pressed for more, and the story continued to unfold. Emily sat quietly during these revelations, her small hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an understanding beyond her years. "I've always had dreams about a woman playing piano," she said. "Not Sarah, someone else." She was crying while she played. The description matched perfectly with Claire's last known moments. Detective Morrison, who had maintained a quiet investigation over the years, provided the next piece of the puzzle. Claire Winters had disappeared the same night as the fire, her body never found. The detective had long suspected a connection but could never prove it. The official report listed her as a tragic victim of a car accident on the same night, though no body was recovered. Bobby felt a new dimension added to his bond with Emily. They weren't siblings by blood, but their connection had been forged by their mother's sacrifice. Both Sarah and Claire had acted to protect not just their own children, but each other's as well. The depth of their friendship and sacrifice added layers of meaning to the melody that had guided Bobby for so long. Grace discovered an old photograph album that showed Sarah and Claire together at the conservatory. The women were captured in candid moments, laughing at the piano, teaching together, their children playing nearby. One photo showed Claire holding baby Emily while Sarah helped a young Bobby with his violin positioning. The timestamp on the photo was just weeks before the tragic night. Emily's musical gift suddenly made more sense. She had inherited her mother's talent, just as Bobby had inherited Sarah's. The harmony they created when playing together wasn't just beautiful music, it was the continuation of a profound friendship between their mothers, expressed through the next generation. Catherine Stewart filled in more details about Claire Winters. She was brilliant, Catherine recalled. She developed the emotional core of Sarah's teaching method. They believed music could bridge any gap, heal any wound. They were working together to document their findings when Her voice trailed off, the implications clear. The protection promise Margaret had mentioned took on new meaning. Sarah hadn't just hidden Bobby from those who sought to exploit his gift, she had ensured Emily would be placed where she could grow up alongside him, their talents nurturing each other. It was Claire's final request, written in a letter found tucked into Emily's baby clothes at the orphanage. Michael finally shared his own painful memories of that night. He had arrived home to find the house in flames, Claire's car in the driveway, and no sign of Sarah or the children. In the following days, as he searched desperately for answers, he discovered that Claire's husband had died under mysterious circumstances months earlier, leaving Claire alone to protect her daughter. Emily's inheritance went beyond music. She had her mother's quiet strength, her ability to understand and heal through music. When she played, those who listened felt a deep sense of peace, just as Claire had been known for her ability to calm troubled students with her music. The revelations about Emily's past created a new dynamic in the Harris household. But she was no longer just Bobby's adopted sister or Michael's ward, she was the living legacy of two remarkable women who had sacrificed everything to protect their children and their beliefs about the transformative power of music. The weight of revelations proved too much for Bobby. Late one night, after hours of restless practice, his violin strings snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the mansion. The sound seemed to break something inside him as well. He collapsed onto the music room floor, his body racked with sobs that had been held back for years. Grace found him there, curled around his violin like a wounded animal. For the first time since his arrival, she saw not a rival or an intruder, but a lost boy carrying burdens too heavy for his young shoulders. Without a word, she sat beside him and began playing Sarah's melody on the piano, her fingers gentle on the keys. Emily appeared in the doorway, drawn by the music and Bobby's pain. Her face showed a maturity beyond her years as she watched her brother break down. "We don't have to be what they wanted us to be," she said softly. "We can just be ourselves." Her words, simple yet profound, hung in the air, like the last notes of a symphony. Michael Harris, hearing the commotion, stood frozen in the hallway. The sight of his children, both born and chosen, supporting each other in their grief, finally shattered his carefully maintained facade. "I failed them," he whispered to Margaret, who had appeared silently beside him. "I failed Sarah, Claire, and now I'm failing their children." The breaking point spread through the household like a wave. Grace stormed into her father's study, demanding answers about her own musical education. "Did you hold me back?" she challenged, tears streaming down her face. "Were you so afraid of what happened to Sarah that you stifled my talent too?" Michael's silence was answer enough. Catherine Stewart arrived unannounced, carrying more of Sarah's journals. "Enough secrets," she declared, spreading the books on the piano. These children deserved to know everything, but as they began to read, the full extent of Sarah and Claire's work overwhelmed them. The journals spoke of music's power to heal, to connect, to restore, abilities that Bobby and Emily had demonstrated unknowingly. James Cooper chose this moment to return to the Harris mansion, seeking redemption. He found Bobby in the garden, trying to restring his violin with trembling hands. "I was jealous," James admitted, "not just of your talent, but of your freedom to play from your heart." His honesty broke another barrier, adding to the night's emotional cascade. Emily retreated to Claire's old piano, her small fingers tracing the keys that her mother had once played. The instrument, silent for years, seemed to respond to her touch with unusual warmth. As she began to play, her music carried all the sadness, confusion, and hope that filled the house. Margaret revealed the final secret she'd been keeping. From a hidden compartment in her quarters, she retrieved a recording of Sarah and Claire's last performance together. The melody that filled the room was the same one that Bobby had carried with him all these years, but now they heard it complete both parts of the duet played by both mothers. Bobby's emotional breakdown transformed into something else as he listened to the recording. His violin forgotten, He sat with his head in his hands, memories flooding back. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember everything the night of the fire. Sarah's desperate instructions, Claire's tearful goodbye to Emily, it all returned in a rush of images and emotions." Grace's anger at her father turned to understanding as she watched him age years in a single night. She saw now that his strictness, his fear of certain pieces of music, had all been his misguided attempt to protect them. "You couldn't save Mum," she said gently, "but you can help us now. Let us play. Let us be who we are." Catherine Stewart gathered the shattered family in the music room. Sarah and Claire believed that music could heal anything, she said. "Perhaps it's time to let it heal this family." She seated herself at the piano and began to play, inviting them all to join in their own way. What followed was unlike anything the mansion had ever heard. Bobby found his voice through Sarah's melody, Grace added her mother's favorite harmonies, and Emily's clear tones soared above them all. Michael Harris stood in the doorway, tears streaming down his face, finally allowing himself to hear his wife's music without fear. The breaking point became a breakthrough. As the music filled the house, old wounds began to heal, and new understanding blossomed. They played until dawn, each finding their own way to contribute to the harmony, each letting go of the weight of secrets and expectations they'd carried for so long. The morning after their emotional breakthrough, Bobby and Grace began their search for answers. The mansion's attic became their base of operations, filled with dusty boxes of Sarah's belongings that Michael had never been able to discard. Each item they uncovered old programs, photographs, handwritten notes added another piece to the puzzle of their shared past. Grace discovered her mother's old performance diary, its pages filled with detailed notes about her teaching methods. Between technical annotations were personal observations about her students, particularly about a young boy whose talent seemed to mirror her own. The dates coincided with Bobby's earliest memories, and the descriptions of the child's playing style matched his exactly. Emily's musical abilities continued to develop at an astonishing pace. During their search, she would often sit at Claire's piano, instinctively playing melodies that complemented their discoveries. One afternoon, as Bobby and Grace sifted through old letters, Emily began playing a complex piece she couldn't possibly have known it was an unpublished composition Claire had written for Sarah. Catherine Stewart became their most valuable ally, sharing her memories of teaching alongside Sarah and Claire. They were revolutionaries, she explained. They believed music could bridge any gap, heal any wound. Their teaching methods focused on emotional connection rather than technical perfection. She helped the siblings understand the significance of the documents they found. James Cooper, seeking to make amends, offered access to his father's extensive music archive. Among William Cooper's private collection, they found recordings of Sarah's early performances, including several featuring the mysterious melody that had haunted Bobby for years. More significantly, they discovered correspondence between Sarah and various music schools, describing her innovative teaching methods. Margaret revealed that she had maintained a secret correspondence with Claire's relatives over the years. Through these letters, they learned that Claire had been investigating something in the weeks before the fire, something that had frightened her enough to make arrangements for Emily's safety. The housekeeper had kept these letters hidden, waiting for the right moment to share them. As they delved deeper into the past, Bobby's memories began to resurface with greater clarity. He remembered Sarah's gentle guidance, the way she taught him to feel the music, rather than just play it. More disturbing were his fragments of memory from the night of the fire, urgent whispers, the smell of smoke, and Claire's tearful goodbye to Emily. Grace's own musical journey took an unexpected turn during their investigation. As she read through Sarah's teaching notes, she began to understand how her mother's methods had shaped her early musical education. She started incorporating these techniques into her own playing, and her music transformed from technically perfect to emotionally powerful. The siblings' search led them to the conservatory's archived records, where they found student evaluations written by both Sarah and Claire. These documents revealed a pattern they had been identifying and protecting young musicians with exceptional emotional sensitivity to music. Bobby's name appeared in the last entry, dated just days before the fire. Emily's role in their investigation proved crucial. Her uncanny ability to reproduce melodies she had never heard before seemed to unlock doors in Bobby's memory. When she played, Bobby would often freeze, overwhelmed by vivid flashbacks of his early lessons with Sarah. These moments helped them piece together the timeline of events leading up to the tragic night. Detective Morrison, intrigued by their findings, provided police reports from the night of the fire. The official investigation had been suspiciously brief, with key witnesses never interviewed and certain evidence overlooked. The detective admitted he had always felt there was more to the story but had been pressured to close the case quickly. The breakthrough came when they discovered a hidden compartment in Sarah's old violin case. Inside was a letter addressed to Bobby, written in Sarah's flowing hand, "My dearest boy. It began, if you're reading this, then you found your way back home. There's so much you need to know about your gift, about why we had to protect you." The letter was unfinished, but its existence confirmed what they had begun to suspect. Sarah had planned for the possibility of Bobby's return. Catherine Stewart's involvement in their search deepened when she revealed her own connection to Sarah and Claire's story. One rainy afternoon, she invited Bobby, Grace, and Emily to her modest apartment near the conservatory. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades of musical history, including several featuring Sarah and Claire in their early teaching days. "I wasn't just their colleague," Catherine admitted, serving tea in delicate cups that had belonged to Sarah. "I was part of their research. We were developing a teaching method that would revolutionize how music was taught." She pulled out a weathered notebook filled with observations about their students, including detailed notes about Bobby's extraordinary progress. James Cooper's transformation from adversary to ally came unexpectedly. After witnessing Bobby's emotional breakdown, something changed in the older boy. He began sharing information about his father's private archives, revealing that William Cooper had been more than just a conductor. He had been obsessed with Sarah and Claire's teaching methods, collecting every scrap of information about their work. Margaret's network of connections proved invaluable. The housekeeper had maintained relationships with other domestic staff from prominent musical families, creating a web of information that had gone unnoticed for years. Through these channels, they learned of other students who had studied under Sarah and Claire's unique method, each showing remarkable emotional depth in their playing. Thomas Reynolds, the school janitor, emerged as an unexpected source of insight. His late-night conversations with Sarah, when she would practice alone in the concert hall, had given him a unique perspective on her work. She believed music could heal people he shared, not just emotionally, but in ways we didn't understand. That's what scared them. Elizabeth Chen, the quiet scholarship student, approached Grace with information about her own family's connection to the story. Her grandmother had been one of Sarah's first students in China, before she came to America. Through this connection, they discovered letters written in Chinese that provided new details about the development of Sarah's teaching methods. Detective Morrison's continued support came with personal risk. He shared confidential files about the investigation into the fire, revealing that certain evidence had been deliberately overlooked. His career had suffered for his refusal to close the case completely, but he remained determined to uncover the truth. Amanda Parker, once Sarah's star pupil, returned from her European tour specifically to help their investigation. She brought with her recordings of Sarah's masterclasses, captured secretly against the conservatory's policies. These recordings showed Sarah working with young musicians, including brief glimpses of a young Bobby displaying his remarkable talent. Dr. Richard Bennett, the school's director, surprisingly became an ally after discovering his predecessor's role in suppressing information about Sarah's work. His position gave them access to sealed records in the conservatory's archives, including correspondence that suggested an organized effort to discredit Sarah's teaching methods. Emily's presence continued to draw unexpected support. Her innocent questions often led to breakthrough revelations, as if her connection to Claire somehow helped others remember long-buried details. Former students of both Sarah and Claire would approach her, drawn by her resemblance to her mother and her natural musical ability. The turning point in gathering allies came during a memorial concert organized for Sarah and Claire. As Bobby and Emily performed their mother's compositions, members of the audience began approaching them with their own pieces of the puzzle, old photographs, letters, and memories that had been kept secret for years. William Cooper himself finally reached out, consumed by guilt over his actions. He provided crucial information about the night of the fire, revealing that he had been pressured by powerful figures in the music world to discredit Sarah's work. His confession opened new avenues of investigation and brought other witnesses forward. The Harris family legacy began to unfold through a series of old photographs discovered in Sarah's conservatory office. Dating back 3 generations, they revealed a lineage of remarkable musicians. Sarah's grandmother had been a concert pianist in Vienna, forced to flee during World War II with nothing but her sheet music and determination to keep music alive in her family. Michael finally shared the story of how he met Sarah, a tale he had kept locked away with his grief. They had been competing pianists at Juilliard, but Sarah's approach to music set her apart. She didn't just play the notes, he recalled, his voice thick with emotion. She made you feel every emotion the composer intended. It was like she had a direct line to their soul. Claire's connection to the Harris family ran deeper than friendship. Her father had been Sarah's first teacher, recognizing in young Sarah the same gift his daughter would later possess. The 2 girls grew up sharing a piano bench, developing their unique understanding of music's emotional power. Letters between the families spoke of their shared vision for teaching music differently. Grace discovered her mother's personal journals, which revealed the depth of Sarah's musical philosophy. She believed that technical perfection was meaningless without emotional truth, and that true musical gift lay in the ability to connect with listeners on a soul-deep level. These beliefs had shaped her teaching methods, leading to both acclaim and controversy in the conservative musical establishment. Emily's role in the family history became clearer as they uncovered more documents. Claire had recognized in her daughter the same sensitivity to music that she and Sarah shared. The decision to entrust Emily to Sarah's care hadn't been made in desperate circumstances. It had been planned, intended to protect both children and their shared legacy. The true nature of Sarah's teaching method emerged from her research notes. She had developed ways to nurture natural musical talent without forcing technical rigidity, allowing students to develop their own emotional connection to the music. This approach threatened traditional teaching methods, making powerful enemies in the musical establishment. Catherine Stewart revealed how Sarah and Claire had worked together to document their students' progress. Each child showed remarkable improvement not just in musical ability, but in emotional intelligence and general well-being. Their method was proving that music could be more than entertainment. It could be a tool for healing and personal growth. Bobby found recordings of his early lessons with Sarah, tucked away in a hidden compartment of his old violin case. The tapes showed a young boy playing with extraordinary sensitivity, guided by Sarah's gentle encouragement. More importantly, they showed Claire working with Emily at the piano, the 2 children's music naturally complementing each other even then. Margaret shared her observations of the family's happier days before the fire. She described how Sarah would spend hours in the music room with Bobby, while Claire worked with both children on piano fundamentals. The housekeeper's detailed accounts helped piece together the daily life that had been shattered that tragic night. Thomas Reynolds, who had maintained the conservatory's practice rooms for decades, remembered conversations with Sarah about her fears. She knew they were watching her, he recalled. She worried they would try to stop her work, but she never imagined how far they would go. His testimony added crucial context to the events leading up to the fire. The family's musical heritage extended beyond personal talent. Sarah and Claire had been working on a comprehensive teaching method that would make music education more accessible and emotionally connected. Their research threatened to upend the exclusive, technically focused approach favored by prestigious conservatories. Michael finally revealed why he had been so protective of Grace's musical education. After losing Sarah, he had become terrified that their innovative teaching method would put his remaining family at risk. His fear had led him to push Grace toward technical perfection rather than emotional expression, a decision he now deeply regretted. The investigation unveiled generations of musicians who had understood music's deeper power, leading directly to Sarah and Claire's groundbreaking work. This legacy now lived on in Bobby, Grace, and Emily, each carrying a different aspect of their mother's gift and vision for music's transformative potential. As the competition finals approached, the pressure on the Harris family intensified. Bobby found his violin strings mysteriously loosened before practice sessions, and his sheet music would disappear, only to reappear defaced with cruel comments. Anonymous notes appeared in his locker warning him to withdraw from the competition for his own good. Grace discovered that someone had been accessing her private practice room, leaving subtle changes to her competition pieces. The alterations were clever slight modifications to tempo markings and dynamics that could throw off her performance if she wasn't vigilant. When she reported this to the administration, she was met with polite dismissal and suggestions that she was being paranoid. Emily became the target of more direct intimidation. Other students began excluding her from group activities, and her personal belongings regularly went missing. The situation escalated when she found her mother's photograph, which she kept in her music folder, torn to pieces. The message was clear: the harassment was connected to their investigation of the past. Catherine Stewart faced professional consequences for supporting the Harris children. Anonymous complaints about her teaching methods began circulating among parents, and she was called before the board to defend her approach. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental, yet she refused to back down from helping Bobby and Grace prepare for the competition. James Cooper's father, William, received threatening phone calls warning him to keep his son away from the Harris family. Despite his past actions, William chose to share these threats with Michael, suggesting that the same forces that had targeted Sarah were still active in the musical community. This revelation added urgency to their investigation while increasing the danger. The pressure took its toll on Bobby's performance. During a crucial practice session, he froze completely, overwhelmed by memories of the fire triggered by a mysterious note left on his music stand. The note contained details about that night that only someone who had been there could have known. Grace found him hours later, still seated at his violin, tears streaming down his face. Margaret intercepted several suspicious individuals attempting to access the mansion under various pretexts. Their questions always centered around Sarah's old music room and any documents she might have left behind. The housekeeper's vigilance prevented any break-ins, but the attempts grew more frequent and bold. Detective Morrison warned the family that someone had been accessing old police files about the fire. Records were disappearing, and witnesses from the original investigation were suddenly becoming unreachable. His own supervisor suggested he drop his renewed investigation, hinting at consequences for his career if he persisted. Emily's nightmares returned with devastating intensity. She would wake up screaming about fire and music, but now her dreams included clear warnings about current dangers. Her connection to Claire seemed to be providing intuitive insights about threats to the family, though the messages came wrapped in terror and confusion. The conservatory itself became a battleground. Bobby and Grace's practice times were constantly interrupted by maintenance issues or double bookings, and their performances in master classes were met with unusually harsh criticism, often focused on their emotional interpretation rather than technical execution, exactly what Sarah had championed. Michael received a formal letter from the conservatory board questioning his judgment in allowing Bobby to compete. The letter suggested that his personal connection to the contestant could taint the competition's reputation. The threat to his position was thinly veiled, forcing him to choose between his career and supporting his children. The tension reached a breaking point 1 week before the finals. Emily was followed home from school by a black car, only escaping by ducking into a crowded store. That same evening, Bobby found his violin case filled with newspaper clippings about the fire, arranged to spell out withdrawal. Grace's piano was vandalized, the strings cut in a way that echoed the damage to their mother's piano the night she disappeared. Catherine Stewart gathered the family for an emergency meeting. "They're not just trying to stop Bobby from competing," she explained. "They're afraid of what might be revealed if he performs Sarah's music on that stage." The implications were clear. Someone powerful wanted the past to stay buried, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to ensure it did. Carnegie Hall buzzed with anticipation on the night of the finals. Security had been doubled following the recent threats, with Detective Morrison personally overseeing the arrangements. Bobby stood backstage, his mother's violin held close, while Grace paced nervously beside him. Emily sat quietly in the green room, humming Sarah's melody under her breath. The competition's prestigious judges included some of the most influential names in classical music. Among them sat Victoria Blackwood, daughter of the conservatory's former director and a vocal critic of Sarah's teaching methods. Her presence added another layer of tension to an already charged atmosphere. James Cooper approached Bobby minutes before the performance was to begin. "Someone tampered with the stage lights," he whispered urgently. "They're planning to blind you during your crucial passages." This last-minute warning allowed Catherine Stewart to alert the technical crew, who discovered and corrected the sabotage attempt. The evening began with Grace's piano performance. She had chosen a piece that Sarah had composed but never published, found among the recently discovered papers. As she played, the audience fell into an unusual silence, captivated by the emotional depth she brought to the previously unknown work. Even Victoria Blackwood seemed affected, though she quickly masked her response. Bobby's turn came as the final performance of the night. He stepped onto the stage, feeling the weight of history and expectation. His program began traditionally enough with Bach's Chaconne, but everyone knew the real test would come with his performance of Sarah's mysterious melody, the piece that had started their journey of discovery. The first sign of trouble came during the Bach. Random audience members began coughing in synchronized patterns, clearly trying to disrupt his concentration. Bobby closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's teaching about finding the heart of the music beyond any distraction. His playing deepened, drawing the audience into his emotional interpretation despite the attempted interference. As he transitioned into Sarah's melody, Bobby felt a shift in the atmosphere. The piece began simply enough, but as it developed, he started adding variations that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his memory. He played passages that Sarah had never written down, but that felt intrinsically right, as if they had always been part of the music. Emily, watching from the wings, began to softly hum along, adding harmonic layers that seemed to complement Bobby's playing perfectly. Grace moved to the stage piano, joining in with subtle accompaniment that enhanced the emotional impact of the performance. The three siblings created something that transcended mere competition music. Victoria Blackwood stood abruptly, her face pale with recognition. The melody had triggered something, a memory, or a revelation that clearly disturbed her. She tried to interrupt the performance, claiming a technical violation, but the other judges waved her down, too entranced by the music to allow the interruption. The audience sat spellbound as Bobby's playing filled Carnegie Hall with emotion. People later reported experiencing vivid memories of their own loved ones, moments of joy and loss, all brought to life by the music. Catherine Stewart, watching from the sidelines, saw exactly what Sarah had always described music's power to connect souls. Michael Harris stood at the back of the hall, tears streaming down his face. For the first time since Sarah's disappearance, he allowed himself to fully feel the music she had created. In Bobby's playing, he heard not just Sarah's influence, but the culmination of her life's work, the perfect blend of technical skill and emotional truth. As the final notes faded, silence held the hall for several long moments. Then applause erupted, building to a thunderous standing ovation. But Bobby barely noticed. His attention was fixed on a figure standing in the shadows of the balcony, a woman with red hair who looked remarkably like the photographs of Sarah. Before he could be sure of what he'd seen, she vanished. The judge's deliberation was surprisingly brief. Despite Victoria Blackwood's obvious objections, Bobby's performance had left no room for debate. He had achieved something beyond technical perfection. He had brought Sarah's vision of music's emotional power to life on one of the world's most prestigious stages. The celebration following Bobby's triumph was cut brutally short. Margaret's frantic call reached them backstage. Emily had disappeared from the green room during the final moments of the performance. Her stuffed rabbit, which she never willingly left behind, lay torn on the floor, and a note written in familiar handwriting warned she has her mother's gift. History repeats. Grace immediately took charge, dividing the search parties while Michael contacted Detective Morrison. Security footage revealed two men in concert attire escorting a seemingly reluctant Emily through a service exit. More disturbing was Emily's expression, not one of fear, but of grim determination, as if she had expected this moment. Catherine Stewart recognized one of the men from the footage, a former board member who had strongly opposed Sarah's teaching methods. "They're taking her to the old conservatory building," she said with certainty. "There's a private performance hall in the basement where Sarah used to teach her special students." The building had been officially closed for renovation, providing perfect cover for the kidnappers. Bobby refused to wait for the police, his sister's safety paramount. Grace backed his decision, reminding everyone how Claire had sacrificed everything to protect Emily years ago. They couldn't fail her trust now. James Cooper offered his help, knowing the old building's layout from his father's stories. Margaret provided them with the original blueprints, kept among Sarah's papers. The journey to the old conservatory was tense. Rain had started to fall, making the streets slick and visibility poor. They could see lights on in the supposedly empty building, movement behind thick curtains. Most disturbing was the sound of piano music drifting from the basement, Emily's distinctive style, but with an undertone of desperation. Inside, the building was like a maze of shadows and memories. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors as they followed the sound of Emily's playing. The music led them deeper into the building's bowels, past dusty practice rooms and abandoned offices. Bobby recognized the melody. It was Claire's last composition, never performed publicly. They found Emily in the basement performance hall, seated at a grand piano. Victoria Blackwood stood beside her, one hand resting possessively on Emily's shoulder. "Play it again," she commanded. "Play your mother's piece." Emily's fingers moved across the keys, but her eyes met Bobby's in the darkness, conveying a silent message. Grace positioned herself near a second entrance, while James circled toward the emergency exit. Bobby stepped into the light, violin in hand. "Let her go," he demanded. "She's just a child." Victoria laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "She's the key," she replied. "Claire's daughter, Sarah's protégée. She can prove what they were doing here." Emily's playing never faltered, but her tempo subtly changed, creating spaces in the music. Bobby understood instinctively she was providing cover for their movement, using the sound to mask their approach. Grace inched closer under the protection of a particularly loud passage. Victoria revealed her obsession with Sarah and Claire's work, how she had spent years trying to replicate their teaching method. "Your mothers thought their approach should be freely shared," she spat bitterly. They didn't understand the power they held, the value of keeping it exclusive. Her grip on Emily's shoulder tightened. The confrontation reached its peak as Emily hit a dramatic crescendo. In that moment of peak volume, Grace rushed forward while James blocked the exit. Victoria reached for something in her jacket, but Emily suddenly switched to Claire's lullaby, the same melody that had always calmed Bobby's nightmares. The familiar notes seemed to freeze Victoria in place. Detective Morrison and his team arrived to find Victoria Blackwood seated at the piano, playing Claire's lullaby over and over, tears streaming down her face. Emily was safe in Bobby's arms, while Grace and James secured the other conspirators. The power of the music had accomplished what force could not. Later, Emily revealed that she had gone willingly with her captors, knowing they would lead her to the truth about her mother's work. "I could feel Mom's presence in that room," she explained. "She used to teach there. Her music was still there, waiting." Her courage and quick thinking had helped expose the people who had threatened their family for so many years. The aftermath of Emily's rescue brought a final confrontation that none of them had anticipated. In the old conservatory's basement, surrounded by the echoes of the past, Victoria Blackwood began to unravel. Her composed facade cracked, revealing decades of obsession and guilt. "I was there that night," she confessed, her voice hollow. "I watched it all happen." Michael Harris, who had rushed to the scene, staggered at this revelation. "You knew," he whispered. "All these years you knew what happened to Sarah and Claire." The pain in his voice filled the room, mixing with the lingering notes of Emily's piano. Victoria's response was a bitter laugh. "Of course I knew. I helped plan it. But it wasn't supposed to end that way." The story poured out of her in jagged fragments. Victoria had been a promising student herself, studying under Sarah, until her father, the conservatory's director, pulled her out. "They were revolutionizing music education," she explained, her hands trembling. "But Father said their methods would destroy the prestigious reputation of classical training. We couldn't let that happen." Grace moved protectively closer to Emily as Victoria continued. The plan had been simple: discredit Sarah's teaching methods, destroy her research and force her to leave the conservatory. But Claire had discovered their scheme and warned Sarah. The two friends had worked quickly to hide their most important findings and protect their children. Bobby listened with growing horror as Victoria described the night of the fire. "We only meant to destroy the research," she insisted, though her voice wavered. "But Sarah was there unexpectedly. And Claire wasn't supposed to be there at all." The fire had spread faster than anyone anticipated, trapping both women inside. But Catherine Stewart stepped forward then, producing a stack of letters from her bag. "Sarah knew you were coming," she said quietly. "These letters detail everything: your father's threats, the campaign to discredit her work, even your role in it all." The letters had been entrusted to Catherine just days before the fire, sealed with instructions to keep them safe. Detective Morrison began recording Victoria's confession. She revealed how her father had used his influence to cover up the true nature of the fire, how they had manipulated the investigation and buried evidence. But she also exposed something none of them had expected: Sarah and Claire had escaped the fire that night. "They vanished," Victoria said, her voice filled with frustrated anger. "We searched everywhere, but they'd planned it all. The fire was their cover. They knew we'd never stop hunting them if we thought they were alive." This revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Michael gripped a nearby piano for support, his legs threatening to give way. James Cooper's father arrived, drawn by his son's urgent message. William Cooper corroborated Victoria's story, adding his own confession. "I helped them," he admitted. "Sarah came to me the day before, made me promise to protect Bobby if anything happened. I arranged for him and Emily to reach the orphanage safely." The confrontation reached its climax when Victoria revealed the location of all the stolen research hidden in a secret room behind her father's old office. Years of Sarah and Claire's work, their revolutionary teaching methods, their understanding of music's emotional power, all preserved despite the attempt to destroy it. Grace's anger boiled over. "You tried to destroy their work because you couldn't master it yourself," she accused Victoria. "You couldn't bear that they had something you couldn't control." Victoria's composed mask finally shattered completely, revealing the damaged soul beneath her polished exterior. Emily, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly moved to the piano. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play, not with anger or accusation, but with understanding and forgiveness. The melody she chose was one of Claire's earliest compositions, a piece about healing and redemption. The music seemed to fill the room with a tangible presence, touching everyone present. Victoria sank to her knees, decades of guilt and bitterness finally overwhelming her. Bobby joined his sisters playing, adding Sarah's counter-melody on his violin. Together they created the harmony their mothers had always envisioned, music that could bridge any divide, heal any wound. The evening reached its crescendo in Carnegie Hall's main auditorium. After Victoria's confession, Bobby insisted on performing one final piece, the complete version of Sarah's melody, with all the parts their investigation had uncovered. The hall filled quickly as word spread about the dramatic events in the old conservatory. Grace took her place at the grand piano, while Emily positioned herself at a second piano brought specially for this performance. Bobby stood center stage, Sarah's violin resting naturally under his chin. The tension in the hall was palpable as Michael Harris stepped onto the conductor's podium, his first public performance since Sarah's disappearance. The performance began softly, with Bobby playing the familiar melody that had guided him home. Grace joined in, adding the harmonies they'd discovered in Sarah's hidden manuscripts. Emily's part came next, incorporating Claire's counter-melodies that had been concealed for so long. The three siblings created a tapestry of sound that seemed to hold the audience spellbound. Catherine Stewart watched from the wings, tears streaming down her face as she recognized passages that Sarah and Claire had performed privately, late at night in empty practice rooms. The music spoke of loss and longing, of secrets kept and truths revealed, of a love for music that transcended personal ambition. Victoria Blackwood sat in the front row, now in custody but allowed to witness this final performance. Her face showed a complex mixture of emotions as the music brought forth memories of her own early lessons with Sarah before ambition and her father's influence had poisoned everything. The performance built in intensity as Bobby began incorporating elements from his competition piece, weaving them into the larger musical narrative. Grace's piano work became more complex, drawing on both classical training and emotional intuition. Emily's playing carried echoes of Claire's style, adding layers of meaning to every phrase. In the midst of a particularly moving passage, a figure appeared in the balcony, a woman with red hair. Then another woman joined her, their presence causing Michael's hands to falter momentarily on the podium. The music seemed to pause for a heartbeat as recognition dawned across the hall. Sarah and Claire had returned. Bobby's playing soared to new heights as he saw his mother for the first time in conscious memory. The melody transformed, becoming both a celebration and a reconciliation. Grace's hands flew across the keys, adding triumphant harmonies that spoke of family reunited. Emily's contribution became jubilant, echoing her mother's style perfectly. The two women made their way down to the stage as the music continued. Sarah took up a second violin, while Claire seated herself at the third piano. Their additions to the performance felt natural, as if they had been rehearsing together for years. The music grew more complex yet remained accessible, demonstrating exactly what their teaching method had aimed to achieve. The audience sat in stunned silence as the performance reached its climax. The combined talents of two generations filled Carnegie Hall with music that transcended traditional classical boundaries. But it was everything Sarah and Claire had worked toward: technique and emotion in perfect balance, music that could touch every heart. Victoria Blackwood broke down completely as the final notes faded away. The proof of what she had tried to destroy was there in the performance, the powerful connection between technical excellence and emotional truth that Sarah and Claire had always championed. Her father's legacy of rigid traditionalism crumbled in the face of this undeniable demonstration. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 15 minutes. Critics in attendance would later write that they had witnessed not just a performance but a revolution in classical music. The mysterious disappearance of Sarah Harris and Claire Winters, the fire at the conservatory, the years of separation and searching, all of it culminated in this moment of musical transcendence. As the applause finally faded, Bobby stood center stage with his family, both birth and chosen, surrounding him. The journey that began with a lonely boy playing violin in an orphanage had led to this moment of triumph, not just for him but for the very soul of music itself. The victory at Carnegie Hall came at an unexpected cost. Catherine Stewart, who had protected Sarah and Claire's secrets for so many years, suffered a severe heart attack immediately following the performance. The stress of the evening, combined with decades of carrying such heavy burdens, had finally taken its toll. In the hospital waiting room, Bobby learned the full extent of Catherine's sacrifice. She had given up a promising international career to stay at the conservatory, positioning herself to protect Sarah and Claire's legacy. Every promotion she declined, every opportunity she passed up, had been in service of keeping their secrets safe until the right moment. Michael Harris paced the sterile corridors, guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders. Catherine had tried to tell him the truth years ago, but he had been too lost in his own grief to listen. Now, as she fought for her life, he realized how much she had sacrificed to protect his family. "I should have trusted her," he whispered to Sarah, who had returned to find her old friend in critical condition. Grace discovered a letter in Catherine's office, dated the day of the competition. In it, Catherine detailed everything she had done to protect the children, including using her own savings to ensure Bobby and Emily's safety at the orphanage. She had maintained a distant watch over them for years, making sure they would have the chance to discover their musical heritage when the time was right. Emily refused to leave Catherine's bedside, playing Claire's healing melodies on a small keyboard the nurses had allowed her to bring in. The hospital staff reported that Catherine's vital signs improved whenever Emily played, as if the music was somehow helping her fight back from the brink. During one of her more lucid moments, Catherine revealed to Bobby why she had been so devoted to protecting Sarah's work. "Your mother saved my life," she explained weakly. "When I was ready to give up on music, on everything, her teaching showed me that music was about more than perfection, it was about healing the soul. I couldn't let that gift die." The doctors were amazed by Catherine's will to live, though they warned that even if she recovered, she would never be able to teach again. The stroke she had suffered during her heart attack had affected her motor skills, potentially ending her musical career forever. The news devastated the Harris family, who understood better than anyone what music meant to Catherine. Sarah spent hours by Catherine's side, playing their favorite duets from their early teaching days on a violin borrowed from Bobby. The music filled the hospital room with memories of happier times, of shared dreams and unified purpose. Claire joined them when she could, their combined music creating a sanctuary of healing in the stark hospital environment. Detective Morrison, visiting Catherine in the hospital, finally understood why she had been so insistent on keeping certain details of his investigation private over the years. She had been protecting not just Sarah and Claire, but their entire approach to music education. Her sacrifice had ensured that their work would survive to inspire a new generation. The conservatory board, shaken by recent events, voted to dedicate their main performance hall to Catherine Stewart. The gesture, while well-meaning, seemed small compared to the magnitude of her sacrifice. As Bobby pointed out in his speech at the dedication ceremony, she gave everything to protect the truth about music's power to heal and connect us. Her sacrifice made our family whole again. Catherine began showing signs of improvement, but the doctors were clear her recovery would be long and difficult. The Harris family vowed to support her just as she had supported them all these years. Emily continued her daily musical vigils, while Bobby and Grace took turns playing for their beloved teacher, hoping that the music would help heal her as it had healed so many others. The joy of Sarah and Claire's return was quickly overshadowed by the weight of years of separation and unspoken pain. The first family dinner together proved disastrous, with Grace suddenly leaving the table in tears, unable to face the mother she had grieved for so long. The carefully rebuilt harmony of the Harris household began to crack under the strain of reconciliation. Bobby found himself torn between his biological mother and the family that had taken him in. Sarah's attempts to resume their musical training where they had left off years ago felt forced and strange. The easy connection they had once shared was buried under years of abandonment and loss. During practice sessions, his playing became mechanical, losing the emotional depth that had always been his strength. Emily withdrew into herself, spending hours at Claire's old piano but refusing to play when anyone else was present. The trauma of recent events, combined with the sudden presence of a mother she barely remembered, proved overwhelming. Her nightmares returned with new intensity, filling the house with her cries in the dark hours. Michael struggled to reconcile with Sarah's choices. Though he understood her reasons for disappearing, the years of grief and loneliness had left deep scars. Their attempts at conversation would quickly deteriorate into painful silences or heated arguments about the past. The music room, once their sanctuary, became a battleground of unresolved emotions. Grace's anger manifested in her playing, which became harsh and aggressive. She refused to use any of Sarah's teaching methods, deliberately reverting to the most traditional and technical approaches. During a particularly heated argument, she accused Sarah of loving music more than her own daughter, words that left both of them shattered. Claire's attempts to bridge the gaps only seemed to make things worse. Her gentle suggestions that they all play together were met with resistance or outright refusal. The harmony they had achieved during the Carnegie Hall performance felt like a distant dream, impossible to recapture in the harsh light of day. Margaret watched helplessly as the family she had helped protect for so long began to unravel. She found Emily hiding in the kitchen more frequently, seeking the comfort of their old routine. The housekeeper's attempts to maintain normalcy only highlighted how abnormal everything had become. The tension reached a breaking point during a mandatory family therapy session. Sarah's explanation of why she had stayed away even after the immediate danger had passed was met with devastating silence. Bobby, who had defended her choices until then, finally voiced his deepest fear: "You chose your work over us." Catherine's condition worsened, likely affected by the stress of witnessing the family's struggles from her hospital bed. Her setbacks seemed to symbolize the fracturing of everything they had fought so hard to achieve. The music that had once healed now served only to remind them of their pain. The final blow came when Grace announced her intention to study abroad, as far from the family's musical legacy as possible. Her decision sent shockwaves through the household, representing not just a physical separation but a rejection of everything Sarah and Claire had tried to preserve. Bobby stopped playing entirely, locking his violin away in its case. "Some broken things can't be fixed," he told Emily when she begged him to play with her. The silence that fell over the Harris mansion seemed to mock the musical heritage that had brought them together and now threatened to tear them apart. The scandal surrounding Sarah and Claire's return rocked the classical music world. The conservatory's reputation suffered a severe blow as details of the cover-up emerged in the press. Major donors withdrew their support, and several board members resigned in disgrace. The institution that had once been a beacon of musical excellence became synonymous with corruption and betrayal. Michael Harris faced intense scrutiny from his peers. His position as a leading instructor was questioned, with many suggesting that his judgment had been compromised by personal involvement. Several prestigious students withdrew from his teaching roster, and his master classes were cancelled due to lack of enrollment. The respect he had built over years of dedication crumbled in a matter of weeks. Bobby's competition victory was tainted by controversy. Critics who had praised his performance now questioned its authenticity, suggesting that the emotional impact had been manipulated for dramatic effect. Concert invitations were quietly withdrawn, and his scheduled debut with the New York Philharmonic was postponed indefinitely. Grace's withdrawal from her scheduled performances created a domino effect of professional complications. Her reputation as a reliable artist suffered, and her agent struggled to maintain her existing contracts. The international piano competition she had been favored to win rescinded her invitation, citing concerns about her family's involvement in the conservatory scandal. The academic community turned its back on Sarah and Claire's teaching methods, dismissing years of research as emotionally manipulative and lacking scientific basis. Their papers were rejected from prestigious journals, and conferences cancelled their speaking engagements. The revolutionary approach to music education they had developed was branded as controversial and unreliable. Catherine Stewart's legacy at the conservatory was questioned. Her years of dedication were recast as conspiracy, and her teaching methods came under harsh review. The board moved to distance itself from her influence, removing her name from scholarship programs and teaching awards she had established. James Cooper's father resigned from his position with the symphony, his reputation irreparably damaged by his role in the original cover-up. The Cooper family's influence in the music world, built over generations, evaporated overnight. James himself faced hostility from former friends and colleagues who felt betrayed by his support of the Harris family. Detective Morrison's career suffered for his persistence in pursuing the truth. His superiors, embarrassed by the revelation of police involvement in the cover-up, transferred him to a desk job. His reputation for integrity, once admired, now marked him as untrustworthy among his peers. Emily's promising future in music education became uncertain. The special program created for her unique abilities was suspended, and other institutions were reluctant to consider her application. Her connection to the scandal overshadowed her genuine talent and potential. The media circus surrounding the family created additional pressure. Reporters camped outside the mansion, hoping to catch glimpses of the reunited family. Every public appearance was scrutinized, and every performance was analyzed for hidden meanings. The constant attention made normal life impossible. The financial implications were severe. Concert bookings dried up, teaching positions were terminated, and legal fees mounted as various parties threatened lawsuits. The Harris family's comfortable lifestyle began to crumble, forcing them to consider selling the mansion that had been their sanctuary. The Harris mansion fell silent in a way it had never been before, even during the years after Sarah's disappearance. Bobby's violin gathered dust in its case, untouched since his last performance. The grand piano stood closed and locked, Grace's sheet music still scattered across its top from her final practice session. Even Emily had stopped humming the melodies that once filled the halls with life. Michael retreated into his study, spending hours staring at old photographs and concert programs. The proud teacher who had commanded respect in every concert hall now barely spoke above a whisper. His hands, once steady and sure on the conductor's podium, shook as he tried to pour his morning coffee. The weight of failure as a husband, father, and musician seemed to physically age him. Grace's departure for London was marked by a painfully brief goodbye. She left most of her belongings behind, taking only clothes and her most basic sheet music. "I need to find my own voice," she told Bobby, avoiding eye contact. Away from all of this, the sound of the front door, closing behind her, echoed through the house like a final, discordant note. Emily's regression was perhaps the most heartbreaking. The confident young musician who had helped save Bobby's competition performance disappeared, replaced by a withdrawn child who flinched at loud noises. Claire's attempts to connect with her daughter were met with silent tears or panic attacks. The trauma of recent events had reopened old wounds that no one knew how to heal. Sarah wandered the mansion like a ghost, touching surfaces as if trying to reconnect with the life she had left behind. Her attempt to organize a family performance at Catherine's hospital bedside ended in disaster when Bobby refused to attend and Grace hung up the phone at the mere suggestion. The divide between them seemed insurmountable. The financial situation became dire. Bills piled up unopened on the kitchen counter as performance fees and teaching income dried up. Margaret, despite her own uncertain future, secretly used her savings to buy groceries for the family. The possibility of losing the mansion, their sanctuary and home, loomed ever closer. Catherine's condition deteriorated further, her hospital room now empty of the music that had briefly helped her heal. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about diminishing chances of recovery. Her absence left a void in their lives that emphasized how much they had relied on her quiet strength and guidance. One rainy evening, Bobby found himself in Sarah's old music room, surrounded by the remnants of their shared passion. Sheet music yellowed on stands, instrument cases gathered dust, and the silence pressed in like a physical presence. When he finally broke down, his sobs echoed through the empty house, drawing no response. The family that had once been bound together by music couldn't even comfort each other anymore. Claire's attempts to maintain some normalcy through daily piano lessons with Emily ended when her daughter had a complete breakdown at the keyboard. "I can't feel the music anymore," Emily cried, her words cutting straight to the heart of their collective loss. The special connection they had all shared through music seemed irretrievably broken. James Cooper's final visit only highlighted their isolation. He found Bobby sitting alone in the dark concert hall of the now empty conservatory. Music was supposed to heal, Bobby said flatly. Instead, it destroyed everything. James had no response. The truth of those words was evident in the abandoned practice rooms and silent corridors around them. The family's dissolution reached its nadir during a failed attempt at a Sunday dinner together. The strained silence was broken only by the clink of cutlery until Michael suddenly stood up and walked out, unable to bear the sight of his broken family. Sarah's quiet tears went unnoticed, while Emily pushed food around her plate and Bobby stared blankly at his mother's empty chair. The healing power of music that they had all believed in so deeply seemed like a distant dream, replaced by a silence that echoed with loss and regret. Sarah's moment of redemption began in the most unexpected way. On a quiet Sunday morning, while the rest of the family remained locked in their private grief, she entered the empty music room and opened her old violin case. Inside, hidden in a secret compartment she had created years ago, lay a collection of letters, one addressed to each member of her family, written during her years in hiding. The first letter she read aloud was to Grace. "My dearest daughter," her voice trembled in the empty room, "every day away from you was a day without music in my soul." She detailed how she had followed Grace's progress from afar, attending her performances in disguise, living through the agony of seeing her daughter grow up without being able to reach out and hold her. Michael found her there, attracted by the sound of her voice. His initial instinct to retreat was overcome by the raw emotion in her words as she began reading his letter. "My love, my anchor, my greatest regret." The letter revealed how she had watched him struggle to rebuild their family, how her heart had broken seeing him distance himself from music in his grief. Bobby's letter proved the most difficult to read. Sarah's hands shook as she described the day she had to leave him at the orphanage, how she had chosen that particular institution because Catherine had connections there and could watch over him. She explained how she had arranged for his violin to stay with him, knowing it would keep their connection alive through music. Emily appeared in the doorway as Sarah began reading Claire's final letter to her daughter. The young girl stood transfixed as she heard her mother's words through Sarah's voice, learning how Claire had spent years documenting their teaching methods not for fame or recognition, but to ensure that her daughter would one day understand her heritage. The letters brought forward a flood of memories and emotions that could no longer be contained. Sarah revealed how she and Claire had spent their years in hiding, traveling under assumed names, teaching music to underprivileged children in remote areas. They had continued their work, but always with the hope of returning to their family when it was safe. As she read, Sarah moved to the piano, her fingers finding the keys as naturally as breathing. She began to play softly, weaving the melody of her words into music. The sound drew Margaret from the kitchen, then Michael from his study. Even Bobby, who had been avoiding the music room for weeks, found himself drawn to the doorway. The most powerful revelation came when Sarah explained why they had stayed away even after the immediate danger had passed. "We discovered that our teaching method could help children heal from trauma," she read from her journal. Children like Bobby and Emily, who had lost everything. We couldn't abandon them, just as we couldn't abandon our own children. So we found a way to help both. Grace's unexpected return interrupted the reading. She stood in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, drawn home by an inexplicable urge she couldn't ignore. The sight of her mother at the piano, surrounded by letters and tears, broke through the wall she had built around her heart. Without a word, she moved to join Sarah on the piano bench. The morning became a catalyst for healing as each family member found their voice through Sarah's letters. Emily began humming along to Sarah's playing, while Bobby retrieved his violin from its dusty case. Michael stood behind Sarah, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, as if ensuring she wouldn't disappear again. Through tears and music, Sarah finally shared the complete story of her years away. She spoke of the children she and Claire had helped, of the lives they had touched, and of their unwavering hope that someday they would reunite with their own families. The music room, which had been silent for so long, began to fill with the sounds of understanding and forgiveness. As the morning sun filled the room, the family found themselves playing together, naturally and without planning. The melody was Sarah's, but each person added their own voice to it, creating something new and healing. It wasn't a performance or a practice session, it was a family finding its way back to each other through the language they all understood best. Detective Morrison's arrival at the Harris mansion that afternoon brought the final pieces of the puzzle together. Armed with newly unsealed documents and Victoria Blackwood's full confession, he laid out the complete story of the conspiracy that had torn the family apart 15 years ago. The plot had originated with the conservatory's former director, Victoria's father, who had seen Sarah and Claire's teaching methods as a threat to the traditional music education system. Their success in helping troubled students through music therapy had attracted attention from major institutions, threatening the exclusive and expensive classical training programs that had made the conservatory wealthy. Victoria's detailed confession revealed how her father had orchestrated a campaign to discredit Sarah and Claire's work. They had planted false stories about their methods being harmful to students, manipulated research data to show negative results, and pressured other teachers to publicly denounce their approach. When these tactics failed to stop Sarah and Claire, they had resorted to more desperate measures. James Cooper's father stepped forward to provide crucial testimony about his role in the events. He described meetings where influential members of the classical music establishment had plotted to destroy Sarah and Claire's research, fearing it would democratize music education and diminish their control over the industry. The fire had been intended to destroy their research, not harm anyone personally. Catherine Stewart, speaking from her hospital bed, filled in vital details about the network of supporters who had helped Sarah and Claire escape. She described how they had created a secret system to protect students who showed the same gift for emotional musical connection that Bobby and Emily possessed. Her testimony explained why Sarah and Claire had felt compelled to stay away even after the immediate danger had passed. The investigation revealed a deeper corruption within the conservatory system. Financial records showed how Victoria's father had diverted funds meant for music education programs into personal accounts, using his position to enrich himself while suppressing innovative teaching methods that might have helped countless students. Margaret produced a hidden diary she had kept during her years of service, documenting conversations and incidents that corroborated the conspiracy. Her detailed observations, combined with Detective Morrison's evidence, created an irrefutable timeline of events leading up to the fire and its aftermath. The most shocking revelation came from William Cooper's private records. He had maintained detailed files about every student who showed promise with Sarah and Claire's methods, tracking their progress and ensuring they received protection from those who might exploit their talents. His records proved that Bobby and Emily weren't isolated cases. There were dozens of children who had been helped by their mother's approach. Emily's role in uncovering the truth proved unexpected. Her perfect recall of melodies she had heard as an infant helped identify specific pieces of music that Sarah and Claire had used in their therapy work. These compositions, when analyzed, contained coded messages about their research and methods, preserved in the one medium their opponents couldn't destroy the music itself. The investigation cleared Sarah and Claire's names completely, proving that their disappearance had been a necessary response to genuine threats. Their years spent teaching underprivileged children were revealed as not just hiding, but a continuation of their mission to make music education accessible to all. Victoria Blackwood's final confession included the names of everyone involved in the conspiracy, leading to a wave of resignations and criminal charges throughout the classical music establishment. The exposure of corruption at the highest levels validated Sarah and Claire's fears and justified their decisions to protect their children at any cost. The process of healing began in Sarah's old music room, where the family gathered after the full truth had been revealed. Grace was the first to break the silence, moving to the piano to play a piece she had composed during her brief time in London, a melody that spoke of forgiveness and understanding. The music filled the room with an invitation to reconnect. Bobby joined his sister at the piano, adding his violin to her composition. Their musical conversation expressed what words couldn't: years of pain, confusion, and longing for connection. Sarah watched her children play together, tears streaming down her face, until Emily gently took her hand and led her to join them. Michael stood in the doorway, hesitating, until Grace turned to him with eyes that mirrored Sarah's. "Dad," she said softly, "we need you." He moved to the piano, and for the first time in 15 years his hands found the keys without trembling. The family played together, each adding their own voice to a symphony of reconciliation. Claire and Emily found their way back to each other through quiet moments at the piano. Instead of formal lessons, they simply played together, letting the music rebuild their bond naturally. Emily's nightmares began to fade, replaced by dreams of playing duets with her mother. Their healing process became a model for the rest of the family. The mansion slowly came back to life. Family dinners resumed, initially quiet and awkward, but gradually filling with conversation and even laughter. Margaret noticed small changes: Sarah and Michael lingering over coffee in the morning, Grace teaching Emily new pieces, Bobby practicing with his door open again. Catherine's recovery took a dramatic turn for the better once the family began performing regularly in her hospital room. The doctors couldn't explain it scientifically, but the music seemed to strengthen her will to heal. Her hands, though still weak, started moving to the rhythms of their playing, and her speech grew clearer with each visit. Bobby and Sarah rebuilt their relationship through early morning practice sessions, just as they had done when he was small. They worked together to combine his natural talent with her teaching methods, creating something new and powerful. Their musical connection helped bridge the years of separation, allowing them to communicate through melody what they struggled to say in words. Grace's anger dissolved gradually as she watched her mother work with underprivileged students at local community centers. Seeing Sarah's teaching methods bring joy and healing to children who reminded her of Bobby at the orphanage helped her understand why her mother had made the choices she did. She began assisting with the lessons, finding her own way to continue the family legacy. But Michael and Sarah found their way back to each other through late-night conversations at the piano, playing softly so as not to wake the children. They worked through years of misunderstandings and pain, their music growing stronger and more harmonious as their relationship healed. The love that had brought them together initially bloomed again through their shared passion for music. Emily's recovery became a family project. Each member contributed to helping her feel secure and loved. Grace became the protective older sister, Bobby remained her steadfast supporter, and both Sarah and Claire worked together to nurture her talent without pressure. The young girl who had been afraid to play began performing confidently again. The healing extended beyond the immediate family. James Cooper became a regular visitor, finding acceptance and forgiveness in the Harris household. Margaret's role evolved from housekeeper to beloved family member, her quiet strength and unwavering support finally receiving the recognition it deserved. The restoration of Sarah and Claire's musical legacy began with a simple student concert at a local community center. Bobby and Grace performed alongside children who had been learning through their mother's teaching methods. The audience, mostly parents and neighbors, witnessed something extraordinary: music that spoke directly to the heart, transcending technical perfection to achieve genuine emotional connection. Word spread quickly through the music community about the remarkable results of Sarah and Claire's approach. Videos of their students' performances went viral, showing children from all backgrounds playing with a depth of feeling that challenged traditional notions of musical education. The conservatory board, under new leadership, issued a formal apology and invited Sarah and Claire to establish a special department dedicated to their teaching methods. Catherine Stewart, now recovering at home, worked with Sarah to document their methodology properly. Their collaborative effort produced a comprehensive guide that combined traditional music education with emotional awareness and healing techniques. The publication quickly became required reading at music schools across the country. Emily's progress became a powerful testament to the effectiveness of their approach. Her performances began drawing attention not just for their technical skill, but for their ability to move audiences deeply. Claire watched with pride as her daughter developed her own teaching style, naturally incorporating both traditional techniques and emotional connection. Grace discovered her true calling in adapting her mother's methods for adult students. She began working with musicians who had become disillusioned with performance, helping them rediscover their love for music. Her program at the conservatory quickly gained a waiting list as professional musicians sought to reconnect with the emotional core of their art. Bobby established a scholarship program for orphan children, providing them access to music education using Sarah's methods. The program's success in helping traumatized children heal through music caught the attention of child development experts and therapists. Research studies began documenting the positive effects of their approach on emotional and psychological well-being. Michael found himself at the forefront of a movement to reform classical music education. His experience as both a traditional instructor and a witness to the power of Sarah's methods made him the perfect advocate for change. Conservatories around the world began consulting him on integrating emotional connection into their curricula. The Harris Mansion transformed into a vibrant center for musical education. Practice rooms that had once been silent now rang with the sounds of students discovering their voices. Sarah and Claire's vision of making music accessible to everyone, regardless of background or technical proficiency, was finally being realized. James Cooper became an unexpected champion of their teaching methods, using his family's connections to promote their work in traditional classical music circles. His own playing transformed as he embraced the emotional aspects of performance, and his concerts began receiving the kind of reviews that spoke of moved audiences rather than just technical excellence. Catherine's recovery accelerated as she began teaching again, now incorporating everything she had learned about music's healing power. Her students, many of whom had struggled with traditional methods, flourished under her guidance. The sight of her conducting master classes from her wheelchair became a powerful symbol of music's ability to overcome any obstacle. The family's musical legacy found its most profound expression in their regular community concerts. These events brought together students from all backgrounds, ages, and skill levels, creating performances that emphasized connection and emotional truth over technical perfection. Audiences consistently reported feeling moved in ways they couldn't explain. Carnegie Hall was filled to capacity for the Harris family's reunion concert. The event, billed as a celebration of music and healing, brought together 3 generations of musicians and their students. The stage had been specially arranged to accommodate both traditional classical performances and the more innovative approaches that had become the family's hallmark. The evening began with Bobby and Grace performing the piece that had started their journey, Sarah's Melody, now fully restored with all its complexities. Their performance held echoes of their competition duet, but with a new maturity and understanding that moved many in the audience to tears. Michael, conducting with gentle assurance, guided them through the intricate emotional landscape of the music. Emily and Claire followed with a piano duet that showcased both technical brilliance and deep emotional connection. The piece, composed by Claire during their years apart, spoke of loss and reunion, hope and healing. Emily's playing had matured beyond her years, her natural gift enhanced by her mother's guidance and her own experiences of separation and reconciliation. Sarah took the stage for the first time in 15 years, performing a new composition that wove together themes from her teaching career. Her students, past and present, joined her one by one, each adding their voice to the growing symphony. The performance demonstrated the power of their teaching methods as musicians of varying skill levels created something beautiful through emotional truth rather than technical perfection. Catherine Stewart, supported by James Cooper, made her triumphant return to performance. Though her playing was simpler than before her illness, the depth of feeling she conveyed brought the audience to its feet. Her student ensemble, combining children from privileged backgrounds with those from the community program, performed with a unity that transcended their diverse origins. The evening's centerpiece was a family performance that included everyone: Sarah, Claire, Michael, Grace, Bobby and Emily, joined by their students and supporters. The piece, composed collaboratively, told the story of their separation and reunion through music alone. Each family member had contributed themes representing their personal journey, woven together into a tapestry of sound that celebrated their restored bonds. Margaret watched from the wings, tissues in hand, as the family she had helped protect finally performed together in public. The love and connection flowing between them was palpable, touching everyone in the hall. Even the most hardened critics found themselves moved by the authentic emotion conveyed through the music. The concert concluded with an invitation to the audience to join in a simple melody that Sarah and Claire had composed for their first community music program. The sight of Carnegie Hall, filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, singing and playing together, perfectly embodied their vision of music as a universal language of healing and connection. As the final notes faded away, the Harris family stood together on stage, their hands clasped in unity. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for their performance, but for their triumph over adversity, their dedication to genuine musical expression, and their commitment to sharing the healing power of music with everyone. The years following the Carnegie Hall reunion concert saw each member of the Harris family finding their unique way to carry forward their musical legacy. Bobby established the Sarah Harris Music Center for Children, a revolutionary school that combined classical training with emotional healing through music. The center specifically focused on helping orphaned and traumatized children, providing them with both musical education and emotional support. Grace surprised everyone by accepting a position at the Royal Academy of Music in London, where she developed a groundbreaking program combining traditional classical training with her mother's methods. Her workshops on emotional connection in classical performance became the most sought-after sessions at the Academy, drawing students from around the world. Emily's path led her to work with young children, using music as a therapeutic tool in pediatric hospitals. Her gentle approach and natural ability to connect with troubled children through music created remarkable results. She collaborated with medical researchers to document the healing effects of musical engagement on young patients, contributing to a growing field of music therapy. Sarah and Claire transformed the Harris Mansion into a teaching academy, preserving its intimate atmosphere while opening its doors to students from all backgrounds. They established a scholarship program that ensured talented children from underprivileged backgrounds could access quality music education. The mansion's music rooms, once silent, now rang with the sounds of learning and healing. Michael found his calling in conducting youth orchestras, applying the family's methods to ensemble playing. His concerts became known for their unique ability to connect with audiences emotionally, as he encouraged young musicians to play not just with technical precision, but with genuine feeling. His summer music camps attracted young players from around the country. Catherine Stewart, though retired from active teaching, became a beloved mentor to the next generation of music educators. From her wheelchair in the mansion's sunroom, she guided young teachers in combining technical excellence with emotional authenticity. Her presence remained a cornerstone of the family's musical legacy. James Cooper underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation, abandoning his pursuit of technical perfection to focus on bringing music education to underserved communities. He used his family's connections and resources to establish music programs in inner-city schools, working closely with Bobby to implement their teaching methods. Margaret, though officially retired, remained the heart of the Harris household. She took particular joy in helping new students feel at home in the mansion, just as she had once helped Bobby and Emily find their place. Her kitchen continued to be a sanctuary where young musicians could find comfort and encouragement. The Harris family's influence spread beyond traditional music education. Their methods were adopted by schools worldwide, and their emphasis on emotional connection in music began to influence other artistic disciplines. Dance academies, theater schools, and even visual arts programs began incorporating elements of their approach to emotional authenticity. The true measure of the Harris family's healing could be seen in their Sunday gatherings, which became a cherished tradition. Each week, family members, students, and close friends would gather in the mansion's main music room for informal performances and shared meals. The atmosphere was warm and supportive, filled with music, laughter, and the joy of genuine connection. Sarah and Michael's relationship blossomed into something deeper than before their separation. Their duets became legendary among their students, not for technical brilliance, but for the palpable love and understanding that flowed through their music. They could often be found late at night in the music room, playing together as if making up for lost time. Grace's relationship with her mother transformed from one of resentment to deep admiration. During her visits home from London, they would spend hours at the piano together, sometimes playing, sometimes just talking. The music they created together reflected their healed relationship, combining Sarah's emotional depth with Grace's classical precision in perfect harmony. Bobby found peace with his dual identity as both Sarah's son and Michael's student. He developed his own teaching style that honored both influences, combining his mother's emotional intuition with his father's technical expertise. His students benefited from this balanced approach, learning to excel both technically and emotionally. Emily and Claire's bond grew stronger through their shared work with young children. Their natural ability to connect through music created a unique mother-daughter dynamic that helped heal the wounds of their years apart. They developed new therapeutic techniques together, each bringing their own perspective to help troubled children find their voice through music. Catherine Stewart became the family's beloved matriarch, her wheelchair permanently placed in a corner of the music room where she could observe and guide the next generation. Her presence reminded everyone of the power of resilience and the importance of maintaining their musical heritage. Students sought her advice not just on music, but on life itself. Margaret's role evolved from housekeeper to cherished family member. Her kitchen remained the heart of the house, where students could find comfort, food, and wise counsel. She had a particular talent for identifying when someone needed extra support, whether it was a struggling student or a family member having a difficult day. The healing extended to the wider musical community. James Cooper became a regular at family gatherings. His previous rivalry with Bobby transformed into a deep friendship. Together, they worked to create opportunities for young musicians who might otherwise never have access to quality music education. Sunday performances became a safe space for experimentation and growth. Students could try new pieces without fear of judgment, and family members shared works in progress. The emphasis was always on emotional authenticity rather than technical perfection, creating an environment where true healing could occur through music. The mansion itself seemed to respond to the family's healing. Rooms that had been closed off during the years of separation were reopened and filled with music. The garden, once neglected, bloomed again as students practiced among the flowers. Even the old creaky floorboards seemed to sing in harmony with the music that now filled every corner of the house. The Harris family's story became more than just a tale of musical excellence or family reconciliation. It evolved into a powerful message about the transformative power of music and love. Their journey demonstrated that true healing comes not from technical perfection, but from the courage to be emotionally authentic and the willingness to remain open to connection despite past hurts. Sarah and Claire's teaching methods proved that music education could be both rigorous and nurturing. Their approach showed that emotional connection and technical excellence weren't mutually exclusive, but rather complementary forces that created more complete musicians and more fulfilled human beings. Students learned that their personal experiences and emotions could enrich their music rather than detract from it. Bobby's path from orphan child to celebrated musician and teacher illustrated the healing power of unconditional love. His ability to maintain his emotional sensitivity despite early trauma demonstrated that vulnerability could be a source of strength. His teaching emphasized that every student's unique life experience could contribute to their musical voice. Grace's journey taught the importance of forgiveness and the courage to question traditional approaches. Her successful integration of classical training with emotional authenticity proved that innovation didn't require rejecting tradition, but rather building upon it with wisdom and compassion. Her students learned to respect both the technical and emotional aspects of musical expression. Emily's story highlighted the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of family bonds, whether formed by blood or choice. Her work with young patients showed that music could bridge gaps that words couldn't cross, offering comfort and connection to those who needed it most. Her gentle strength inspired others to find their own path to healing through music. The transformation of the Harris mansion from a place of silence and separation to a vibrant center of music and healing served as a powerful metaphor for the family's journey. It demonstrated that with love, patience, and courage, even the deepest wounds could heal, and the coldest silences could be filled with music again. Catherine Stewart's recovery and continued influence reminded everyone that setbacks didn't have to mean endings. Her presence in the music room, teaching and guiding from her wheelchair, showed that adaptation and resilience could lead to new forms of contribution and connection. Her students learned that limitations could become opportunities for growth. The lasting message of the Harris family story was simple yet profound. Music has the power to heal, connect, and transform when approached with an open heart and authentic emotion. Their legacy wasn't just in the musicians they trained or the methods they developed, but in the countless lives touched by their belief in music's ability to reach across all barriers and speak directly to the human soul. Through their example, they taught that true artistry requires not just skill, but the courage to feel deeply, to remain vulnerable, to forgive, and to love unconditionally. Their story continues to inspire new generations of musicians to approach their art not just as a discipline to be mastered, but as a path to healing and connection. Dear viewers, thank you for joining us for the Melody of Second Chances. Your support means the world to our creative team. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We'd love to hear how the Harris family's journey resonated with your own experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that celebrate the power of music, family, and healing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this tale and share it with friends and family who might find inspiration in this story of redemption and love. Your engagement helps us continue creating meaningful content that touches hearts and changes lives. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community. Looking forward to reading your comments. The storytelling team.